Welcome to the Somatic Coaching Academy Podcast. I'm Ani Anderson.
And I'm Brian Trzaskos. Join us as we explore the science
and art of trauma-sensitive somatic practices and tools.
Strengthen your practice as a coach, therapist, or holistic professional.
Master the art of motivating even the most challenging clients when you understand how to tap into and unlock your client's complete holistic intelligence.
If you want to learn the most cutting-edge, research-supported skills for personal and professional mastery, you've come to the right place. Let's get this conversation started.
Hi, and welcome to the Somatic Coaching Academy Podcast. Hey there, Brian. Happy 4th of July.
Happy Independence Day, Ani. All right.
Happy Independence Day.
You kind of surprised me there with your Independence Day glasses.
I did.
Nice.
We love Independence Day here at the lake.
Well, we do love it here at the lake. Lots of family around.
Yeah.
Our twice yearly, annual, biannual, I don't know how those bis and annuals work. Anyway, but twice a year, our family gets together from all over the place and at the lake. And we have a core group of people, and it's just so much fun.
And I got to tell you, the 4th of July meeting for me is the best. I know, Thanksgiving is also awesome, but it's really the best because we can be outside and be at the lake and be together outside doing outside stuff. It's kind of hard to be in here right now, not in my bathing suit, hanging out at the dock.
Yeah, right. Well,
but I'm really excited to talk about independence because we get to do those kinds of things, and other kinds of independence, like we're going to talk about
today. So we do have listeners from all over the world. We just want to say too. So in the U.S., this week is the week of Independence Day.
Sure.
And, wherever you are in the world, there's likely a celebration about Independence Day as well, hopefully. And even if there's not, the theme of this week is around independence. So if you remember last year, we did an episode on declaring independence from lower emotional states. And so if you haven't listened to that one, you can go back and declare independence from lower emotional states if you'd like. But this week, this year, we're talking about how coaches can help their clients declare independence from self-judgment.
I am declaring independence from self-judgment, Brian, as if that's all that it takes.
As if that works. Yeah, right. So let's jump in. So oftentimes when we talk about a topic that a lot of people talk about, self-judgment. You can, if you engine search this one out there, you're going to find a lot of information out there about it. So we want to make sure we're kind of coming at the lens from the way we approach these things here at the Somatic Coaching Academy, from a somatic lens. But let's maybe get on the same page to start off with. Like, how are we actually defining self-judgment? So of course, the way I like to define these things is I go to the books. I go to the research and say, what are researchers saying about these things? How are they defining these things? So I have one right here. So this is a definition that was that I found in a paper called Victimization in Light of Self-Compassion: Development Towards Communal Compassion, 2017 paper on aggression and violent behavior by Moshe Benesam. So that's where I'm kind of grabbing this definition from.
Okay.
And it was quoted from an earlier paper from Neff in 2003. Anyway, here we go. So in this definition, self-judgment is an uncompassionate response. It refers to being harshly self-critical in instances of pain or failure, rather than kind and understanding towards oneself. Self-judgment leads to rejection of one's own feelings, thoughts, impulses, actions, and worth.
I think that's interesting because the definition has baked in there something about pain and failure. And it's my experience that some people experience a lot of self-judgment, which means that they must be experiencing perceptions of pain and failure quite a bit.
Yeah. So I just, again, you can look around, you can find lots of different definitions. I like this one for a couple of reasons.
You liked the thoughts, feelings.
That's definitely for sure. I like that it included this idea of feelings, thoughts, impulses, actions, and worth, because
SBMC
it just points back to the SBMC pyramid. Exactly. So anytime I see a confluence like that, I'm like, yay, let's definitely bring that in. I also like the idea of having that pain and failure in the definition, Because if we reverse engineer this, then when people find themselves being self-judgmental, then according to this definition, whether they realize it or not, as you indicated, there must be some perception of pain or failure.
Yeah.
So we kind of start bringing some awareness to it from either side that way.
One of the reasons I like this is because one of the things that we've been able to help people do for the entirety of our careers is help people who are having chronic pain. The translation of what that looks like to a person who's not having chronic body pain has always been difficult to
Hmm.
enlighten people's perspectives about. And like, that's what we're talking about.
Right.
Right there, the person's having some kind of pain. And it's not that they're having, chronic back pain where they can't get up or walk around. They're having a painful experience internally.
Mm-hmm.
And we
Yeah.
talk about how pain is perceptual, and obviously internal pain perception is really important. So
Yeah.
that's what I'm thinking about
Yeah,
right now.
yeah, that's great. It's great. So this idea of judgment. Now, babies are not born inherently self-judgmental. I mean, let's just say that, right? I'm not sure there's been any conclusive idea that humans are born with the capacity for self or
Well,
inherent capacity or and
babies aren't born with a sense of self.
well, correct.
So some of the research talks about how, and I of course don't have the exact dates or ages or data, but I was just listening to some research about this recently, where the sense of self isn't actually even developed until closer to the age of like 2.5
Yeah.
starts to emerge.
Right.
So there isn't even a self.
Okay.
So regardless of
There you go.
that,
So don't even have a self. Great point. Great point.
yeah,
So let's just leaning from there in terms of self-judgment, I think we have to acknowledge that self-judgment is a habit
it's learned.
that we are taught, right?
Correct.
So self-judgment is learned. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
So if you're someone or your clients are someone who experience self-judgment, then just know that we're not born that way.
It's learned.
That's something that we learn.
You can learn something else.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So
Yeah.
then the question is, well, why the heck would we learn something like that? Because it seems like, in a lot of ways, self-judgment is troublesome for people. It actually stops them from creating what they want in their lives. It stops them from having healthy relationships. It stops them from having healthy bodies, all those kinds of things. So why the heck? Why the heck would we learn self-judgment kind of to begin with? And where do we even learn it from? Right?
Well,
And
if we don't have a self for the first few years of our lives, we're learning it from the people around us,
yeah,
soaking it up into our subconscious mind.
yeah,
'Cause
exactly.
that's how babies learn.
Right. So we're either learning it through our parents, our caregivers, our society, something like that.
But what's crazy is you get to a certain age and you have all those patterns in you, and now you have a self, and you go, oh my gosh, look what I do. But it wasn't even yours to begin with.
Correct. Yeah. But we can oftentimes own it
We do.
as ours or as inherently us because we don't remember when it started because it started in the soup of what we were, you know. So I think the two basic ways that someone would come to learn self-judgment is two basic ways. The first way is if parents and caregivers are overly critical or judgmental of a child, then the child would certainly then learn to be overly critical or judgmental of themselves.
Sure.
Right.
And people who do that also are overly critical of
Themselves,
And
exactly.
they're projecting it onto the people around them.
Right.
It happens to be the kids.
Exactly. So that just that's a process. Now, the other way though that it can happen too is that if a child witnesses their parent or caregiver being self-judgmental, even if that judgment isn't being projected back onto the child from that particular person,
100%.
the child will still learn it.
Yes.
And this is kind of like in all of our trainings, when we talk about these kinds of things, I know parents can get a little bit kind of judgmental about it actually, right? And they can start to bring a lot of self-judgment in to themselves because they're like, I'm ruining my kids and
Ruining their
all
lives.
those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Or so
What did I
that's not our
do?
intention here. Our intention here is again to bring awareness to these things so that they get moved on change. And if we bring in self-judgment, then we actually stall the process. And a lot of times, again, we know parents that are trying to protect their kids from their own habits. So they say, I purposely don't overly criticize or project onto my kids, but they're doing it to themselves. Remember, there's a little adage that kids do what we do, not what we say. And so kids learn by example, by modeling. So if we're a parent who is very self-critical or very self-judgmental, then a child will just model that and soak that up, and without it even being directed towards them. So those are the two ways that self-judgment is kind of learned.
So just take a pause here for a second. As a coach, if you're helping your clients with self-judgment, really looking for yourself at where your self-judgment is, because the ping pong that can happen between the lines, underneath the verbal language, underneath even the body language, but right, like these subconscious signals that we send other people when we have really tough self judgment going on and we're trying to help somebody else unravel it, but we've got it going on. Like we're called as coaches to look at that for ourselves so that the client can sincerely sit there and do their own work without getting all the like frequency issues from us.
Yeah. So, humans, I don't think that humans inherently like pain.
Sure.
We don't inherently like pain. And
Well,
criticism or self-judgment.
okay.
So there, so you would think, well, if we don't inherently like those things, like why do we keep doing them?
Uh-huh.
So there must be a purpose for this pattern of self-judgment
Uh-huh.
that's passed down
Uh-huh.
from generation to generation to generation to generation,
You're gonna tell me
right?
what you
So
think it is. Like you
yeah,
figure it out ahead of time.
well, I have an idea.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
I have a thought around it,
Okay.
and it just goes primal to, unless you want to share one first. Okay. I mean, it's primal to humans. It's a protective mechanism. I mean, so we learn self-judgment as some sort of protection mechanism.
Hmm.
And I think for me, the clearest, what are we protecting ourselves from? We're protecting ourselves from social unacceptability,
Abandonment, man.
abandonment, right?
Abandonment.
So if we act out in ways where it's not socially acceptable, which would mean being exiled or having abandoned, that's the greatest threat to the core human, the baby, the child, that are set in ourselves. And so we come up with these judgments of ourselves or of others to keep ourselves or others in line, right? And so that's basically that self-judgment is the behavior of that whole process. Is this That's also kind of like the tip of the iceberg.
Very young children learn to keep themselves in line because they understand if I'm not, that risks me being abandoned. And
Right.
to keep myself safe, I have to keep myself in line. And we learn very nuanced ways to be able to do that stuff very, very young.
Yes, exactly.
Hey, I have a question for you.
Yep.
Have you ever experienced self judgment?
Oh yeah, sure.
When was the first time that you remember thinking this is self judgment?
Oh gosh, it's so long ago.
Because
I
what I'm really wanting to know is what is your experience of self judgment? Because I was surprised when I was thinking about this for myself, what my experience of self judgment is. So I was curious to see what you would have to say.
Well, I don't remember specific incidences, but I do kind of remember like a trend. And so I became aware of how critically judgmental I was being of myself when it seemed like the errors I was making had bigger consequences.
Oh, that goes along with your thing with failure there,
Right.
your definition.
So like getting a
Okay.
car accident and it's like, oh, you stupid idiot. Like I can't, and like berating myself
Hmm.
and sometimes I did that actually I felt like if I berated myself and I judged myself and I was critical of myself, maybe other people wouldn't be as critical of me.
Sure.
Like if I was demonstrating
That
how
you
hard I
already.
was on myself,
Uh-huh.
then maybe I wouldn't have as much external punishment,
Black, sure.
right? So that's kind of a process. But so I noticed the very high degree I was being self-critical with big things first, and but
Huh.
only thought it was big things
Mm-hmm.
until
Right.
right until it became more nuanced and
Mm-hmm.
more nuanced, and I started paying attention to my inner dialogue on a more consistent running basis.
Mm-hmm.
And then I really noticed the almost a constant stream of self-criticism and self-judgment.
And when you say constant stream, you mean voices talking in your
Voices,
head
yeah,
kind of
yeah, like
thing?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, almost on a like I didn't put enough peanut butter on my sandwich,
Right.
and it's like, you stupid jerk. I mean, why need how many sandwiches have you made? And that kind of thing. And then I would catch myself going, wow, but it's interesting. I'm thinking about myself, about the failure of a peanut butter sandwich. There's no consequence to it.
Right, right.
But so what I'm saying is
It
that,
started with this
it
big
started,
consequence.
the big awareness, it started with the big
Mm-hmm.
consequences, but then I
Mm-hmm.
started paying attention to it. And I'm talking about this about like over years. This
For
isn't
sure.
just like over a week's time. This is
Yeah.
like this started a couple decades ago. And notice the more subtle, more subtle, until I noticed how almost ever present it was.
Mm-hmm.
And then I realized I really need to actually start at that level, like
Mm-hmm.
a little homeopathy. Like
Mm-hmm.
I need to actually start on the vibrational level, the subtle level,
Mm-hmm.
not when it gets so critical and huge,
Right.
because then it's harder to manage.
More the daily.
I had to get on the daily with it. What
Interesting.
about for you?
I really didn't recognize that I was self-critical until one step past you telling me that I was really hard on myself.
Hmm.
I'll describe the one step past in a second.
Okay.
But it's interesting to me looking back at the trajectory now that you used to tell me you're so hard on yourself, and I didn't really see it. Like I just couldn't really see it. Now here's the one step past. It wasn't until I felt like in our personal relationship, you would like have this, you and I would have this pattern where you'd like pull away, and I thought you were punishing me by pulling away. And I became aware of that pattern that I thought you were punishing me.
Mm,
That I was like, if I think you're punishing me, I must be punishing me.
mm.
And then I started to really watch, do I punish myself? Then the you're so hard on yourself actually started to make sense to me
Ah, got you. Wow. Yeah.
because I've heard the voices in my head all my life, but it never really occurred to me that they were self judgment, which
Mm.
sounds insane to me to say because I could tell you any of the number of things that they would say to me, the voices in my head, and obviously they're self judgment, but it never occurred to me. So it didn't occur to me until you and I were going through those
Oh,
patterns.
interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And
Yeah.
then I realized I was judging myself and punishing myself and could kind of like look back from there. And the way that I was able to continue to work on the pattern and notice it was definitely through my sensations and not my thoughts.
Mm, yes.
Because the thoughts would just kind of keep me in this thought loop, and I'd be yelling at myself in my head or out loud to try to stop it, and they would just keep coming, and it was like awful. But when I could pay attention to my sensations and work with my sensations, that was the unraveling of my life as a self punisher.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks so much for sharing that with me. I mean, I think that's very clear description, and everybody I think is going to really kind of soak that up and benefit from that. Um, you know, and let's dig into that piece too. By the way, that the importance of working with it somatically,
Yeah,
because that's a critical bit. The kind of the core feature of self-judgment, if someone's wondering, well, am I experiencing self-judgment, kind of like you're saying, is this actually what it is?
yeah,
One of the core features of self-judgment is right and wrong. Like there's like, if you really want to get
sure.
down to it, is, are we polarized into there's a right way and a wrong way to do, think, have, be, whatever it is that
Right.
we're experiencing right now? And I actually am doing it the wrong way, which demands that I am self-judgmental to get myself to do it the right way. And I get
Yeah,
myself to do it the right way through critical self-talk or blame or whatever it is, right? All those mechanisms,
projection.
projection, but the self-judgment is really right and wrong kind of thinking.
Yes, for
So
sure.
one way to kind of determine, am I actually in self-judgment is to ask himself, am I polarized into right and wrong right now?
Yeah.
Black and white,
I
left, right, up, down.
one of the ways you can gauge your progress with it is your attachment to the right and wrong thinking. I have a client who's been working on self judgment for a number of years, and she's really to this place where there really is sincerely no right or wrong. You can hear it in her everyday
Yeah. Yep.
conversations. And that's my barometer for knowing that she's made it to a place where she's really not judging herself anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what the
Not like she
interesting thing
was.
is that a telltale of how beholden you are to self-judgmental thinking is if when you hear there's no right and wrong, that you say, of course there's a right and wrong. What do you mean? There are definitely things that are right and definitely things that are wrong.
If that
If
activates
that
you.
activates you,
Yes.
then you're still actually beholden to that thought pattern. Because once you actually let go of right or wrong, it doesn't mean that you all of a sudden allow yourself to go start robbing banks and like mugging old ladies, which is what we think is going to happen if we let go of the idea that there's no right or wrong, right?
Just imagining some people listening right now. They're like driving in their car, listening to the podcast, and they're like, no right or wrong. That's not true. Click.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe you just turned it off and
Bye.
you're not listening anymore. But once you actually once you truly transcend that thing, you actually understand more about what we're actually kind of talking about happens on the other side of that. But one way to tell if you're still beholden to it is if it activates you when we say there's no right and wrong.
That's a very good point.
Right. So I just want to kind of put that in place right there.
Yeah. So if you're just like tearing your hair out right now, what are they talking about?
Yeah.
Send us an email. We'll talk.
We'll get you hooked
Yeah.
up. So what we know here, gang, is it's like the problem isn't always how we feel about ourselves. Because self-judgment is, again, it's how we feel about ourselves. I'm wrong, right? There's something about me that's wrong.
Fine about myself all these years. It was really you that was the problem. And I'm
That's a good point.
joking and not joking. I did not realize I was having a problem with me. I was very clear it was
It
you.
was me. Okay. Well, I'm glad I could reflect that back to you.
Thank you.
Right, exactly.
Thank
Because
you,
I'm
dear.
perfect
Thank you,
in every
dear.
way.
Yeah.
So, but it's not so much like how we feel about ourselves. It's how we feel about ourselves.
Right.
That's really, really important
Yeah. Yeah. How we feel
about
about
how we feel
about
about ourselves,
Yeah.
right? Because some things are going to happen and we're going to feel a certain way about ourselves.
Mhm.
And then at that point, we get to decide how to feel about how we feel.
So my turning point sensationally working through this stuff
Yeah.
with sensations was when I developed a really clear relationship with the shame that I was feeling. And then to your point, the feeling that I was feeling about my relationship with shame.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I recognized that I was feeling shame like a lot and I had no idea. And I was trying to cover it up basically all the time. And I actually remember where I was and what was going on when the shame like came to call that one day and it wouldn't go away. And I was using all of my tools and it was still there after a number of hours. And I just gave up. And I was like, I'm going to stop being upset about the fact that I'm having shame.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was the last time that it stuck around like it had been my entire life.
Yeah. Powerful learning.
It was so cool. And I'm not going to tell you, I never have my shame sensations come up anymore, or the sensations that are like that, of course, because we work with the sensations, not the emotions. But on that, it's not like that never happened, but it doesn't stick around like that anymore. And I don't feel bad about it when it comes up.
Yeah, yeah. So just as what you did, Ani, and how do we declare independence from self-judgment? From a somatic kind of process, we need to start in the body. Because self-judgment is, we've both said this, the voice is in our heads.
Yeah.
Right? So self-judgment actually is very, very loud in the thinking form of things, right? It's very loud in our hearing the voices or whatever it is.
The continued self-sabotage because it actually throws your attention off from the place where you can do something about it, which is in your body. So it has you focusing on the voices in your head, which continues the patterns of self-sabotage.
Right. Yeah. So when we're dealing with self-judgment, what we really need to do from a somatic process is get into the body, understand what the pattern of self-judgment is about. And of course, every somatic pattern has those four parts: sensations, thoughts, words, and actions. People are very in tune with the thought part of it, for sure.
Yes.
They may even be very in tune with the word part of it. They might not be as in tune with the action part of it, but they're likely not at all in tune with what the sensation part of it is.
Yes, I agree. Because if you were paying attention to and really with the sensations, it would very clearly draw your attention off of the voices in your head because it's usually pretty strong.
Yeah.
The sensations that a person feels when they allow themselves to move into the sensory aspect of the self-judgment pattern can be really big, like profound,
Yes. Profound.
magnified,
Yeah. Yeah.
It doesn't mean that's got to be scary or whatever, but it can be like, whoa, I didn't realize that was going on.
Yeah. So from a sensation-based kind of lens, the idea is to identify, recognize, become aware of what the specific sensations are that are happening or a part of the self-judgment pattern. And then a really deep question to ask right there is, what is this meant to protect?
Yep.
So while one is experiencing the sensations themselves, instead of like buying into all the
What's wrong
stuff,
right now?
it's like
What's the, yeah.
what are these sensations trying to protect? Because self-judgment, remember, was taught as a process or a method to protect ourselves from being abandoned.
Yeah.
And so if we understand that process, we can go back in and go, wow, so what are these sensations trying to protect me from doing, saying right now? And that will start to, then you start to understand the core part of the pattern. Where did it start? Where did it start? And is it actually true anymore? Is
Yeah.
it actually still valid? Is it still real? And sometimes that pattern will fight for its life and try to convince us that it's real. But if we really come at it from working with a coach, if we're having it reflected back from a coach, if you're a coach doing this process, then it's kind of like identify the sensation and then what is this sensation meant to protect you from?
And it's one of the really profound reasons to work with a coach on this because you have this experience and it's being witnessed by somebody who's doing their own work on their stuff, by the way, who can witness your experience and you, because, we're just talking about protecting ourselves from abandonment. So you're working with somebody who, if they're doing their own work, Brian, is not going to abandon you if they're doing their own work.
Correct. Yeah.
Because that happens, by the way.
Sure. Yeah.
It
Yeah.
happened to me more than one time
Yeah.
to be working with a professional who isn't doing their own work and actually abandons me or the process when I'm being vulnerable in my stuff. For anybody who's gone through that, it just stinks. I'm sorry that happened to you. So to have that be witnessed by somebody who can stand with their own work in your space and be there with you can break the spell of the abandonment thing. And there's like that extra secret sauce that's going on with the whole bit.
Yeah. And, the other reason why it's so important to start this work in the body, and we've talked about this a lot, is because what's happening in the body is influencing the higher brain levels. And so if you, of course, when I'm researching for this podcast, getting ready for it, I read a bunch of articles and other professionals like what to do about self-judgment. And so a lot of those things are really based in cognitive processes. Like, they're talking about things like, let go of the feelings.
Right.
Don't give it power. Try to look at the environment, what it's caused. I mean, I think those are all good.
Sure.
And at the same time, when
talking about-
we're in the self-judgment, there's either so much blame for ourselves. It's like, none of that matters because I'm horrible, or none of that matters because you suck, sort of thing. It's hard to break out of that.
Yeah.
So when we go to the body to start with, then we can actually work with the core, what's actually holding this whole pattern together. Now, of course, one of the suggestions that's often given for self-judgment is the idea of forgiveness.
Yeah.
And I think this is so true. And we have a little twist on it because, we do a lot of work around traditional Chinese medicine, right?
Sure.
And it is true when you look at how traditional Chinese medicine looks at the cure, if you will, or the remedy for self-judgment actually is forgiveness. It is true.
Sure.
And also forgiveness can become a very intellectual experience for people.
Yeah.
It's like, well, how can I possibly forgive that? Something was done wrong.
Right.
Correct, right? So it's right or wrong. Something was done wrong. I can't forgive it.
You say you forgive it, but you're not really forgiving it. Look at your actions.
Yeah.
Come on, or your words. Like, no.
Yeah. And so other little thing we say is if you're having trouble forgiving, it's because you don't understand something. Like once you understand something as a whole, whatever happened, whatever's going on as a whole, it naturally allows forgiveness to blossom. The kind of the key factor in forgiveness is understanding. But again, understanding can be a very intellectual process. From a somatic lens again, when you're working with the sensations of self-judgment and you take someone through a process of neutralizing the charge of the sensation associated with the self-judgment, that actually is forgiveness.
It's embodied forgiveness.
It's embodied forgiveness.
Right, which is why you can go through a process like that and then leave a process like that and like not even remember the not what happened, Brian, but like the charge around
The charge around
why
it's
you
gone.
were even like you don't even remember that you were upset about it.
It actually makes more sense because you understand more about it.
Correct,
It
correct.
reveals the whole nature of the situation.
Yeah, and this explains this idea of how sometimes we have emotional reactions to things or people. Like, God, every time I'm around that person, I just feel like I have a reaction. And then all of a sudden, you don't have a reaction anymore. When you do a process like you were talking about, the reaction disappears because you actually embodied forgiveness. You had an embodied experience of forgiveness, and it's done.
Yeah. And that is declaring your independence from self-judgment. That's actually how you declare independence from self-judgment is you work in the sensation element of the judgment, self-judgment. You neutralize the sensation element. That actually creates more understanding, and that's naturally embodied forgiveness. That's how you declare independence from it.
Well, on that note, I'm going to put on my Independence Day glasses.
All right. So we've got our Independence Day wear on. I hope wherever it is that you are right now in the world, that you are having a joyful and healthy celebration. Hope that you're surrounded by people that you love and care about.
Yeah.
And I hope that you allow yourself
To declare your independence.
Your independence from self-judgment and anything else that you would like to be independent from.
Thanks for joining us today. We will see you real soon next week on the Somatic Coaching Academy podcast.
Okay, time for hot dogs.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode. We hope that this conversation will help you improve your practice and change the way you think about your work, your clients, and yourself.
Continue your exploration of trauma-sensitive somatic coaching by listening to more podcast episodes at somaticcoachingacademy.com. You could be the trusted guide that people turn to help them with their most challenging situations and to reach their most precious goals. Thank you for joining us.
We'll see you next time.